Hi, this will be a short video introducing React and just some of the basic concepts of React. I have a simple page here that is an easy way to get started with React. I have a GitHub page here, which I'll post a link to in the comments. And on my site here, there's a project called Front End React. And this is a lesson on React, and it goes through a lot of stages here, all the way up through Redux and some other stuff. In here, I have a file in a folder called Single File React Starter, and you can just download this file or download the whole thing and grab this page right here, index.html, out of this folder. I have it on my desktop here. And it's this file. I'm going to duplicate it and make a copy like this. And then I think I'll open it in the browser. So there we go, right? That's the same file. I'll close this other one over here and this one, right? And so what is this? Let's take a quick look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to brackets and find my file here, and this is what it looks like, okay? Normally you'll start your React projects, and the tutorials will do them in a different way later, but and you'll want to start them in using Webpack or some other JavaScript bundling system and package manager. For this project, though, just to make it simple, I set everything up so you can just have one single HTML file, drag it into the browser, and do all your editing in this one file without having to do any other setup. So this is kind of the easiest way to get into this. So at the top here, there's a link to a couple libraries that do the work of loading React and transpiling React, right? So React is written in a language called JavaScript, but it uses an extension to the language called JSX. And JSX allows us to write HTML tags mixed in with our JavaScript. And you can see that here. As I scroll down the page, there's a style tag, and then there's the body tag, and this is where our page is going to appear. And then I have a div tag here, and our React components are actually going to get rendered to this div tag. So they'll get produced here by JavaScript, and then the script tag down here is where all of our JavaScript is written. And you'll notice this looks like standard JavaScript. Here's a function that takes some props and it returns a value. And it's a little strange though, because in here you'll see I have some HTML tags. So this is JSX. JSX is HTML tags that are written within your JavaScript. So in a lot of ways, you can see that this just looks like normal JavaScript, right? Except for the HTML, right? And you can see as I scroll down, I have two components in here, and I'll get into components in a moment, right? There's two components, and you can see at the bottom here, there's sort of another tag that looks like a funny tag, right? It's got title, and then it says title, and then it's got this thing here, but it kind of looks like an HTML tag, one of the self-closing type, right? So we'll talk about the components in a moment, okay? This page has two components, right? There's a title component and then a clock component, okay? At the bottom of the page, there is a little piece of boilerplate code. It says React DOM.render, and then you'll see again there's some HTML in here. So this render method of the React DOM object takes two parameters. One of them is some JSX or React components that you want to render to your page. And then the second component, or the second argument here, is the item that you're going to render them to. And you can see this says document.getElementById, and then it says the ID name is app. So if you recall, at the top of the page, I have a div with the ID name app. So React DOM is going to render, the React element, the first parameter, into this div right here, okay? So that's how it's going to work, right? We're going to render some stuff here. So let's talk a little bit about JSX and components, right? So components are essentially like little modular bits of code that represent, elements of your web page. So they could be, a heading, a footer, some items in the body of your page, and then inside the body component or the header component. You could have a component that was, a nav bar or a title or, anything that you have in an HTML page, like a list item, a tweet box, anything you can imagine could be written up as a component. And components are composable. That means you can put one component inside another. So each one of those components could actually have other components inside it making it up. So you can, create web pages in sort of a Lego-like fashion where you take a bunch of components and throw them all together to make some new effect, right? My page is very simple here. It has two components. One of them is called title, and one of them is called clock. Okay, these are two different types of components, and I used this example to illustrate the two kinds of components you can create. This is a simple component, and this is a stateful component. Okay, so you can see the names here. This is title, and this is clock. Okay, so when I've created those components, after I've created them, I can write them as JSX. So this essentially is the title component. Okay, so I just write it inside the tag here. And I could have written it out with a closing tag like this, right? I would get rid of the thing here, right? And that would be okay. So anytime you have a tag, oops, wait, this should have been a uppercase T there, right? Okay. Anytime you have a tag that doesn't have a closing tag, you can self-close that tag with the backslash. Okay, so that's one feature of JSX. Okay, essentially JSX just looks like HTML. Okay. Also, this one shows the self-closing tag right here, and this is the clock component. Okay. When you're writing JSX, essentially, like in most cases, you need to have a single element, right? A single parent element. So what I did is I wanted to render two components here, so I have to have an upper level component, a div. I can't render the two separate tags like that. Okay, they have to have a parent to hold them together. So essentially, I have to have like one JSX tag, and that tag can contain any number of other tags, right? So in this case, we have a div, and it contains the title and the clock. The div here is just a standard HTML tag. So essentially, when you're writing the JSX, you can write any regular HTML tag. And those tags, the tag names always begin with a lowercase letter. Your component tag names for the components that you create should always begin with an uppercase letter. Okay? These components that you create can contain HTML. So if we look up here at the simple component, you can see that this component is just a function that has the title of the component here. It takes props as a parameter, and then it returns some JSX. So that's really what makes this a component, right? So anytime you have a simple component, it's really just a function that takes props as a parameter and returns some JSX, right? So JSX could be anything here. You could have an H1 or whatever tag you want to return, and then we can do something with the props thing here. I'll explain that later, right? But essentially, we have to just return some HTML. Okay. If I wanted to return more HTML here, I could wrap this in a div, and then put the H1 inside here. And let's imagine like I want to put an HR tag underneath here. I'll do an HR like this. That's a standard HTML tag, right? And since I'm returning two tags, I need to wrap them in some kind of container, okay? And my component here, when we see it, it's actually displaying React's starter, right? And then this clock actually uses the title component to display the clock. So now you can see there's an HR tag here, and the HR shows up there, right? So you can do anything you want with these, any kind of stuff you wanted to, anything you could think of with HTML you could do here, right? So essentially JSX is you writing HTML within your JavaScript. It needs to be compiled though. Okay, so we have to have some special compiler. We can't write that normally. Okay, so I've got the compiler loaded up here, and then we're telling this to run that through Babel, right? So there you go. There's just a simple introduction to React and components and JSX, and we'll talk more about this stuff in the next video.